Welcome, Congressman Johnson. Great to see you today on this ASP Chat.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We are here today to talk about America's relationship with China. And we hear a lot from policymakers about the need to compete with China. So first off, as one of those policymakers, can you explain to us what we're competing over and how this competition influences the overall U.S.-China relationship?
Massive difference in worldview between China and the United States. I mean, China is not our friend. And I'm not one of these saber rattlers that feels like we need to view every country that disagrees with us as an enemy. I mean, I get it. We've got a huge diversity of opinions and approaches in the globe. But that's with China, we're not just talking about a difference of opinion. We're talking about a country that for a long time has had in their strategic documents the fact that they want to knock America down off our perch as the world's only superpower. Their human rights record is terrible. 1 out of 5 large American companies has said China has stolen their intellectual property in the last few years. China is increasingly threatening Taiwan. On almost any dimension you can imagine, China is taking steps to try to, frankly, control more of the world. We just can't let tyranny like that win.
Sure. How would you rate recent government efforts to compete with China, like the CHIPS Act? Are they enough, or does Congress need to do more?
Well, what I love is a growing bipartisan understanding of the threat. I mean, when you got Speaker Pelosi willing to go to Taiwan, that was clearly a message sent by her that we're not going to let all of this bluster and all of these threats by China stand. Now, the CHIPS Act was focused on the right thing, that is bringing some of this chip manufacturing back to the country. I mean, it was too expensive. I think reasonable people can disagree about the specifics. It spent about twice as much money as we really needed to spend. And I think, again, some reasonable people said that just gives too much money to the big companies. Now, we got to work with the big companies, right? I'm not trying to demonize them, but I do think that that bill probably missed the target on the specifics. But let's focus on the good news. The good news is that we've got people on both sides of the aisle, in both the House and the Senate, starting to talk seriously about serious legislation that would try to make sure that China doesn't injure America. I would mention one more thing. I mean, China is trying to have incredible control over the American supply chain, particularly around food. And I think we need to be concerned about that. China has purchased 1,400 agricultural processing facilities in the last few years in this country and elsewhere at a value of $35 billion. I don't think we should give our adversaries that kind of control over our food.
So we get a lot of questions from the ASP audience around environmental and economic policies. So from your perspective, how do the environmental laws and regulations affect our ability to compete with China?
Well, first off, I would tell you clearly we need to do a better job of being stewards of the environment. That is something we should all aim to do. There is no greater environmental villain in the world than China. China's emissions of greenhouse gases are greater than all of the developed world combined. Sometimes people think that America is the big polluter. I mean, we're closer to a third of the emissions of China than we are half. That's for carbon. And so we know that there is a role for American leadership to continue in the environmental arena. We do know that there are times regulations can get in the way. So in the last few years, America has reduced our carbon footprint by more than the next 15 carbon reducing countries combined. And that, by and large, wasn't about regulation. That was about innovation. That's about real smart people who are willing to make an investment, have capital at risk to try to go develop better ways of using or not using energy. And we just want to make sure that the regulations we put in place don't get in the way of that.
Well, it's difficult to have a discussion about America and China without mentioning Taiwan, especially when it comes to critical electronic goods like microchips. And our audience wants to know, what role does Taiwan play in regards to America's effort to remain competitive with China?
Yeah, when people talk about how all of the chips in the world are manufactured in China, sometimes they forget that there is another China in Taiwan. That is also a supply chain risk for America, because if China were to invade Taiwan or cut them off, that would mean that the rest of the world would lack access to chips. And so we do need to diversify our supply of a lot of these tech supplies, but that should not give us an excuse to walk away from Taiwan. The contrast is very clear. China, they like authoritarian control. In Taiwan, they believe in human rights. I mean, they believe in democratic values. And we need to continue to support Taiwan. We're thank goodness that Putin is getting his butt kicked in Ukraine, because I think all intelligence reports indicate that has caused Xi Jinping and others in China, not that anybody else's opinion matters in China. I mean, the guy's really basically a king, but it's made him understand that the global community will not ignore unchecked aggression. I mean, these sovereign boundaries mean something. People's rights to be able to govern themselves mean something. I think that makes Taiwan a little safer in the short term, but we need to stand with them to make sure that they're safe in the long term.
TikTok is a Chinese-owned company, and you recently proposed the Block the Talk Act, a bill that would prohibit TikTok from accessing U.S. user data and block the installation of TikTok on government devices. Why?
Well, this is my attempt to become the most unpopular father in America. It seems as though I'm moving in the right direction. But this is not about taking away your personal ability to download the app. Now, I don't think you should. I've taken the app off my phone. I've deactivated my account. I don't think most people realize the extent to which China has gotten access to this information. You've had whistleblowers from within TikTok who have admitted that even though China said that they would never access that data, they have. And TikTok has paid $100 million in fines for violating their commitments surrounding the privacy of user data. And they're using this data in all kinds of nefarious ways. But again, although I don't think you should use the app, my bill would not take away your ability to exercise your freedom. What my bill would do is say, listen, if you're a government employee, a federal government employee, you can't have that on your device. And my bill would echo the decisions that have already been made by administration and military officials. There are larger and larger portions of the military who tell their soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that they can't have TikTok on those devices because it is a national security threat. If the military feels that way, if the State Department feels that way, then we just need to have a policy really across the federal government. And frankly, I think you're going to see a lot of bipartisan momentum behind this bill.
I like it. Finally, economic and environmental issues are important, but as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, when anti-Asian hate crimes spiked 150%, the way we talk about policies can have an impact on how people act. Does the drive to compete with China risk increasing anti-Asian sentiment in the U.S.?
Chris, I think you put it exactly right, and that is the way we talk about it, right? So step one is figure out what to do. China is an adversary. They threaten America. We need to make sure that America is resilient to those attacks. We're not going to let other issues complicate the decision on what. But once we've made the right decision on what to do in the best interest of America, then we move to the question of how. And I think it is incumbent upon every decent leader to make sure that when they talk about the tyranny of China, that we are talking about Xi Jinping. We are talking about the Chinese Communist Party, and we're not saying anything that would lead any decent person to believe that the Chinese people themselves are the problem. They're being oppressed. We need to put into place policies that will help the Chinese people long term, even if they do not do anything to help the Chinese Communist Party.
Congressman, always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, sir. It's great to see you.
Thanks for doing what you guys do.